Often, God's infinite glory is shown in the most ordinary of circumstances. This is the case with servant of God, Charlene Richard. And I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. Born in 1940s Louisiana, Charlene was about as typical of a Cajun spirit as you could find. She was born into a large Catholic family of 10 children, spoke both English and French, and had a devotion to the Blessed Mother. She attended Mass and prayed the Rosary. Now, this may sound odd for a preteen girl this day and age, but at that time and location, this was quite normal. She was an intelligent little girl who played basketball at her middle school and loved horseback riding. At 12 years old, she read a book about Saint Therese of Lisieux, and I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, and asked her grandmother if she could become a saint by praying like Saint Therese. Her grandmother answered, "All we can do is our best."
"Then I will do my best,"
was the response Charlene gave. There was nothing extraordinary, though, about this little Cajun preteen. Every resource I found on this servant of God used adjectives like ordinary, average, typical, normal, and even unremarkable. So why am I even talking about her almost 80 years later? Well, let's go back to, again, when she was 12, when Charlene's teachers started to notice a change in her demeanor. She seemed noticeably tired and showed less of that typical carefree joy we see in kids her age. And then she told one of her teachers she kept seeing a woman in black. That was enough to convince Charlene's mother to get her to the doctor. The diagnosis was not good. She had acute lymphoblastic leukemia. In 1959, this was as good as a death sentence. Charlene's parents couldn't bear to tell their little girl that she was dying, so they asked the chaplain of Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital, Father Joseph Brennan, to take on that task. Father Brennan reluctantly agreed, praying fervently as he took the elevator up to the floor where Charlene rested and contemplated how he was going to break this news. He was astonished by how well she reacted. He told her, "When it's time, a beautiful lady will come to you and take you with her." Charlene responded with,
"I know. And I'll tell Our Lady that Father Brennan says hi."
I love this response. This, you guys, is why we are called to be like children. Charlene took on her diagnosis and the suffering with childlike trust. The pain and suffering she would endure for the next 2 weeks would be excruciating. But those around her noted that she did not complain. Father Brennan taught her the Catholic doctrine of redemptive suffering, which, simply put, is the idea that you can unite your suffering to the suffering of Jesus Christ in order to help others. Just under 2 weeks after her diagnosis, Charlene's suffering ended as the beautiful lady came to take her home. That's a pretty remarkable ending for an average little Cajun girl. But if that was all there was to her story, I probably wouldn't have heard of her and likely wouldn't be doing this video. I love researching and telling these stories, by the way, so I greatly appreciate all the support my viewers give me by liking these videos, commenting, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. It really does help that dreaded algorithm know that these are important and interesting stories. My prayer is that we can continue to help spread the news of God's glory through these incredible people and their stories. Let's go back to Charlene's story. Before Charlene had even died, Father Brennan was already spreading the word. There was something special about this seemingly ordinary little girl. Father Calais, and I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, was a close friend of Father Brennan and heard all about Charlene. In 1961, he prayed that Charlene would intercede for him so that he would be assigned to a parish. That same year, he was assigned to St. Edward in Richard, Louisiana. And yes, for the record, Richard, Louisiana is where Charlene Richard was buried. But there was a problem. St. Edward was in need of a new church, but didn't have the funds to build one. He turned to Charlene once again and asked her to intercede. Father Calais would later say that he had started telling people Charlene's story. Then those people would visit her grave, and then they started sending checks to build the church. Father Calais would report that what he thought would take nearly a decade to build only took 2.5 years. Her story was starting to spread all over Southwest Louisiana, and by 1972, prayer cards were circulating for private devotion only, asking for her intercession and praying for her beatification. In 1975, local newspapers were publishing stories, and a booklet was put together. A booklet which had to be updated again just 4 years later in 1979 to add all the stories from people who had benefited by their prayers to Charlene. By 1989, her story had spread outside of Louisiana. Pilgrims were now visiting her grave so often that the cemetery had to put in extra lighting and a box for petitions that were being left behind. In 2023, the New York Times published an article about the amazing events that were attributed to this little girl. Thousands now come every year to visit her grave, and I, several hundred miles away and over 80 years later, know her story. But why? Why was this normal preteen girl's reputation spreading so broadly? Why were so many people making pilgrimages to her gravesite? Well, here are some of the stories people were telling. And for the record, none of these have yet been verified by the Catholic Church. That doesn't mean they won't be, though. A mother tells her story. She had just given birth to a little girl who was quickly diagnosed with Down syndrome. She showed all of the physical signs. The mother began to pray that she would have the strength to raise a disabled child. And then she remembered Charlene. She asked Charlene to intercede. And when the obstetrician came back to check on the newborn and saw that the baby showed no signs of Down syndrome, he broke into tears. A father tells his story. His 19-year-old daughter had just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. But after she visited Charlene's grave, she was completely healed. She now is married with 4 kids and living in Texas. Another mother tells her story. Her family was told that their unborn baby was not developing properly and had 2 severe brain abnormalities. Abortion, they were told, was the only merciful option. Now, let's be clear, abortion is never merciful. Anyway, the family prayed a novena asking for Charlene's intervention. A later ultrasound would show that one of the abnormalities was completely gone. So the mother flew to Richard to visit Charlene's grave and asked for her help one more time. She would later give birth to a healthy baby girl with no signs of any brain abnormalities. There are 1,600 written testimonials that the Diocese of Lafayette has gathered and reported of healings and other intercessions tied to Charlene Richard. Servant of God, Charlene Richard is a great example of how God often works through the intercession of small, humble, and quite frankly, unremarkable people. Because of Charlene's willingness to suffer alongside Christ, she has changed the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, of people in the decades after her death, while always pointing people to Christ. So, ask for Charlene's intercession privately, and if you believe you've received a grace through her intercession, you can submit it to the Diocese of Lafayette for review. They'll add your story to their ever-growing pile. Charlene is one of those examples of a saint who is easy to relate to. She was an average, ordinary young girl who just loved God and had the faith like a child. It's no surprise that she was able to relate to a saint like Saint Therese of Lisieux, who was known for her little way. And you can watch that video right here.